Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this panel on 20 years on Turkish-American relations under the AK party. August 14, 2001 was the date that the AK party was founded, and ever since, nobody can deny that it has put its stamp on Turkish politics as well as Turkish foreign policy. Turkey has become a major power in its region, and then it has also played critical roles in a number of global issues. We thought that this was a good opportunity to take stock of the AK party's record over the past 2 decades under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, with obviously very accomplished professors and opinion leaders, analysts, and people who are at the center of a lot of decisions these days in Turkey, in Ankara, in Istanbul. I am myself here in Istanbul for a short visit myself, so we are all attending this webinar from Turkey, and I definitely feel privileged to be able to host Akif Kireççi, Professor Akif Kireççi, and Professor Çağrı Erhan for this webinar. I don't want to take too much time, as always, and I want to jump right into the discussion. And obviously, they both have extremely impressive resumes, and again, we are very lucky to have them discuss Turkish foreign policy, its past, its today, and then its future, as well as we want to touch upon, obviously, the Turkish-American relations as well. So I want to quickly turn to Professor Kireççi, and if you could identify some of the major turning points in this past 2 decades you think were critical to the evolution of Turkish foreign policy under the AK party, and expand upon any of the points that you would like to make. And we'll try to make this as dynamic as possible with back and forth, and we'll try to get as many questions as possible from the audience as well. I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar. Professor Kireççi, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kadir, for inviting us for this panel, and thank you for those who have time to listen to us. How much time I have in order to identify critical turning points during the last 20 years or 2 decades? Like 2 minutes?
I know you're very capable of doing that. But 5 to 10 minutes would be great.
Time span is too big to cover within such a short period of time. But let me start with saying that with the very election of JDP as the main party, ruling party, in Turkey's system is a very big turning point in many ways, that which marks sort of a peace between the state and certain groups within Turkey, which later on opened the way for JDP to open up to its surrounding countries, first of all. Prior to that, we can discuss certain elements within Muslim countries that aspired to take part in politics, but they failed. So with the JDP winning the elections in 2002, actually marks a very important turning point, which later on during the Arab Spring brought about a very major discussion that the Turkish model idea. How much it's relevant today is a different story, but then the discussion was that sort of some of the groups, religious groups, practicing Muslims or conservatives made peace with the system, and therefore the system opened the way for them to take part in the governing process. So this itself is a very important turning point for me in Turkish foreign policy, which sort of opened many possibilities in front of other movements in the Middle East and in other Islamic world. That they sort of they made a peace. It doesn't mean that they were at war with earlier system, but they made their views known to the rest of the world that they are fine with the liberal economic system, that they are ready to play with the rules of the international system, so on and so forth. So I think this is a very important beginning point. Maybe we can turn back to this idea and highlight it further. Another point is, for instance, Turkey is opening to its surrounding neighbors. Prior to that, it was a sort of a classical Turkish foreign policy attitude towards its neighbors, especially towards its southern and eastern neighbors, that Turkey, to put it in a mild way, kept a very important distance between these countries, namely Syria, Iraq, Iran, and other neighbors. Turkey started to develop high-level cooperation councils to increase economic cooperation between its neighbors and between other countries. This obviously extended not only to Middle Eastern countries, but also to Eastern Europe and other European countries as well, including Italy, for instance. So it was with the JDP, there was a proactive effort on the part of Turkey to open up to different parts of the world, including its neighbors and including at a later point in 2005 and later in 2009, 10, and even today to Africa and to Latin American countries. The Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, was another turning point, a very critical point in Turkish foreign policy. That Turkish model idea was debated in a very lengthy way by different scholars in different corners of the world, how relevant Turkish model was, how applicable Turkish model was, and was there a Turkish model to begin with. So this is also another important point. The visit of Obama after his election to Turkey was a very important point as a sort of first country in Europe and also in the Middle East as a Muslim country. His speech even today is a very remarkable reference, but Turkish-American relations fell very low from that point afterwards. And then election of Trump was another sort of critical point in Turkish foreign policy. And America's involvement in Iraq in two decades ago, the effects of which we still experience, negative especially effects of which we still are experiencing, and also Arab Spring in Syria, and later on America's detachment from this problem, and Russia's involvement in Syria. And I mean, we can go and on and on and on. And most important, last but not least, Turkey's involvement in Syria, that Turkey had to work with Russia, Turkey's procurement of weaponry from Russia, and so on and so forth. All of which pose several important issues, some including opportunities in front of Turkish foreign policy, during these 2 decades, Turkey faced several challenges from different corners of the world. But that the worst of challenges came from its neighbors with the intervention of outside forces. And in the meantime, Turkish diplomatic corps had to grow with these crises, had to develop new set of skills in order to meet challenges coming from different directions, from all sorts of corners of the world. So I think Turkey, as a geopolitical pivot in this part of the world, not only represents stability and security, the symbol of stability and security for its allies, but also for its eastern and southern neighbors. It is a sort of a crossroads in the seaways, landway, bridging the different cultures, different countries, and also facing different winds from different corners of the world. And whoever is ruling Turkey has to develop or must have several set of skills diplomatically and security-wise and economically. So I think this would be a good start. Not enough, I'm sure, but I think we can start from here.
Absolutely. I think your initial remarks about what AK parties coming to power meant domestically and sort of rearranging in many ways the political relationship between the state and the citizens, that was one of the crucial aspects of all of this, I think, because it redefined where the public opinion lies, or how it matters for foreign policy in the intervening years. And we saw that starting with Iraq's invasion of Turkey refused to allow US forces from the north into Iraq. So I think that was, thanks for highlighting that. And of course, we're gonna, like you said, the Arab Spring, the Syria issue, the grand politics of Russia versus US, etc. We will probably go into specific issues, but I want to turn to Professor Erhan before getting back to you again for his initial remarks, how he sees this process and where we are.
Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be with you again. In fact, Professor Kireççi made very important points about the nature, the changing nature of everything. And as an initial remark, I would like to underline that everything has changed in 2 decades. It's not the same world when compared to 2001. It's not the same Turkey. It's not the same United States. In 2001, when AK party was established, even there was no euro, there was no Bitcoin. Nobody heard about Elon Musk that time. Okay, there were few drones, only military ones, no unmanned autonomous cars, no COVID. And everything has changed because the economic and social environment and dynamics globally changed. And when it comes to our region, not only the political and economic map of the region, the Middle East, North Africa, Caucasus, Eastern Mediterranean, but also the political map has dramatically changed. So as the changing nature of global and regional dynamics getting fast, it has enormous impacts on Turkish foreign policy, as well as Turkish domestic policy, of course, but also on Turkish relations with the United States. But when we look back to not 2 decades, but 200 years of Turkish-American relations, since it started in early 19th century, we see a tendency of ups and downs. So we cannot talk about in any period of bilateral relations a golden age. Sometimes I read and I hear from some analysts that some periods in Turkish-American relations, for example, the 3 early years after the military coup in 1980, under the military regime of Kenan Evren, it was perfect between Turkey and the United States. Or 2 years after the coup in 1971, it was perfect. Turkey prohibited opium cultivation, etc. No, there was no golden ages in Turkish-American relations, particularly since 1945. We had very good cooperation in many fields, but we always had problems. So these 2 decades of AK Party rule in Turkey, and there were 3 different, now the 4 different presidents in the United States, we had a lot of cooperations, particularly in strategic and military areas, but also we had big problems and increasing problems. So we should not give any special credit to this era. It is not unique when compared to previous periods, 10 years of Democrat Party, for example. they also had problems with the United States. But we should always keep in mind that when these two countries, domestic, political, and economic and social environment changing, at the same time, all the global dynamics are changing. So foreign policy should be analyzed, taking into consideration of the other outer dynamics, what's going on in Russia, what's going on in the European Union and the Middle East countries, because when we are talking about any country's relation with the United States, we should also take into consideration the other great powers who wants to play some role in the concerned area.
Thank you, Professor Erhan. Again, very valuable reminder that, you know, the broader dynamics of global power, you know, changes definitely have its mark on the US-Turkey relations as well. We often have a hard time in Washington when we talk about Turkey. It's often about Turkey and then US and what US wants, etc. With, you know, like you said, with some sort of reference to a golden age where Turkey was a great ally and now it's not, and etc. But thanks for highlighting those broader changes and contextualizing the ups and downs. Professor Kireçi, you have mentioned quite a few things about the Middle East, how the region has changed, and US has been arguably, maybe not arguably, the biggest power in this region, although it's an outside power, and it has defined the dynamics. When you look back, you know, you don't have to dwell on the past 20 years, but when you look back, how do you see Turkey kind of navigating these changes, given its relationship with the West, with the US, with the European Union? You know, like I mentioned, often it's framed in the sort of framework of, oh, it's not Turkey is no longer a good Western ally type of criticism, when, you know, all these changes are happening in the region and Turkey has to respond. How do you see that Turkey's efforts and record on that?
Well, we also face all that in many occasions when we go abroad or when we meet with our European or American friends. But that's misinformed, if I may start with that statement. It's a very misinformed and very unfortunate statement, because it is really detached from reality on the ground. If, for instance, if you come and look at what's going on in the southern part of Turkey's borders in Syria, you realize how big of a role Turkey is playing in terms of looking after displaced civilians within Syria. I'm not to mention how much displaced Syrians we are taking care of within Turkey. This is outside of Turkey's borders. Just to name, for instance, one example is Idlib. And that's one. Another one is that the stabilization around Turkey from east and from south, whether with the intervention of our allies or without, there's such big problem in Turkey's borders, around Turkey's borders. Turkey is a sort of, I always repeat this as a trademark, that Turkey is an island of stability in this part of the world. And another point, just from the most recent to perhaps the earlier, if we take a reverse chronological order, is that, for instance, the presence of Russia in Syria and detachment of United States from this part of the world forced Turkey to act with Russia in certain occasions. But Turkey is not acting with Russia, but trying to balance the situation in Syria. So that's another point, how Turkey is a center of stability. Well, if we go a little bit further down the line after the Cold War, Turkey was left alone, if you will. Turkey's role, as from time to time we remember that, was good old times, as Professor Erdoğan mentioned, that to keep a very, very large army against the threat of the Soviets. And the role of Turkish army was, it's rumored, to put it that way, it's rumored that Turkish army was supposed to keep Russian army, Soviet army, for about 48 hours until European forces get ready, so to speak. So after the Cold War, Turkey found itself incomplete on many grounds in terms of infrastructure, in terms of education, in terms of several facilities, defense industries, so on and so forth. And yet, there was no thank you note, but rather there was a PKK suddenly emerged in the 1980s or the 1980s. So, which is a major problem still in Turkey. In the borders of Turkey, Turkey was able to force this terrorist threat to outside of its borders, but it is still a major threat coming from Iraq, and also its offshoot threatening Turkey in the form of PYD or in several different acronyms in Syria. So Turkey attempted several times to navigate its way through post-Cold War with its allies, but that navigation, those attempts received no positive answers, if we can state that way. Just as a very important example, that Turkey wanted to become full member to the European Union, but got rejected. That rejection was not sort of a verbal, not outright, but they took maybe 40 different shades of the gray, if I may, quoting a title of a movie, that Turkey was not wanted within the European community. Well, Turkey is currently present in every single institution within the EU, minus it's not the full member. So all of these forced Turkey, if you will, that it had to look for its own way. It had to develop its own approach to its security, to its economic development, to its other alternative ways of being part of or taking part in this newly emerging modern world, in a globalized new world order. So what I can say again and again is that it's not Turkey that didn't want to be part of this European or Western system, but it is our allies, or it's Europeans that sort of ostracized Turkey from their own community. But still, Turkey, on several occasions, the rulers, the politicians, the president, and all ministers repeat again and again that to become the full member to European Union is a strategic target for Turkey. But still, for instance, another picture you can read from the defense industry that Turkey had to develop. For instance, one good example is unarmed vehicles that Turkey was trying to acquire from Israel or from the United States. When Turkey was denied to purchase, Turkey had to develop its own technology. So all of these indicate, on one way or another, that Turkey was left alone with its problems. And as long as Turkey solves these problems within its limited capacity, Turkey is a good boy. But when those problems sort of spill over the Turkey's economic, social, or political capacity, Turkey is being criticized. So no country can face all of these challenges alone. But Turkey is sort of trying to develop several alliances, several friendships, partnerships, while remaining loyal to its earlier security signatures, if you will, that is North Atlantic Alliance and so on and so forth. So Turkey is, despite several criticisms, despite several issues that we face or tackle every day is part of this system, whether they like it or not, and Turkey is going to remain so.
Thank you, Professor Kireçi. Professor Erhan, like Professor Kireçi just mentioned, there have been a lot of issues between the West over broadly and Turkey. There has been some themes that have been there from the beginning, and it's still going on. And you extended the date back 200 years. There are some themes that are always there that we always discuss. But then there are things that are, like you mentioned, so many new things that have changed the entire world, not just the region. So when you look at the US-Turkey relationship in particular, what do you see as sort of long-running issues, and what do you see as more temporary issues? Because, you know, like you mentioned, there have been 4 presidents and there's been 1 president and prime minister in Turkey for the last 2 decades. How do you think that has functioned as kind of an advantage and disadvantage also? In what ways do you see those dynamics have played for, let's say, the betterment of the US-Turkey relations, but also for the problems?
Okay, if I start with a long-term problem, I may call it the mutual distrust. This mutual distrust, particularly in public level, did not change in these 2 decades. If I refer to some public surveys, which is done by some respectful university and other firms and companies, some public surveys shows us it was 60% the negative public perception of US in Turkey was 60% in 2001, just before 9/11. So it was before 9/11. It was just after George W. Bush came to power in 2000. But this negative US image perception has raised to 85% in 15 July 2026. Between them, we have 80% during 2003. You know, this motion crisis, 1st of March 2003, and then 4th of July incident in Süleymaniye. That time it was around 80%. Then it climbed up to 85%. In 2021, it is around 70%. So there is always a negative public perception of US in Turkey. If we go back to 1960s, late 1960s, among some intellectuals, among some university level people, maybe it was higher. I didn't see any this kind of surveys about 1960s and 70s, but there is always a negative US perception. And I'm sure the result is not different if you make such a survey in Washington, D.C. nowadays. I mean, if you make such a survey in Senate, for example, or in Congress, you don't need to do, because whenever we see any document produced against Turkey, we see almost every single member of Congress signs under it. So anything against Turkey is very popular.
Let me just slip in a question that was posed by the audience right on that topic, and they say, to what extent has AK Party forged relations, interparliamentary, interlegislative, with the US Congress to foster US-Turkey relations? But go ahead.
This is one of the solutions, because I would like to, why did I start with this negative issue of mutual distrust? Because it is the basis. If you have very long-term continued misunderstanding of each other or mistrust about each other, then you cannot develop reliable and fruitful relationship. It will be always just very weak and depending on some issues. If you want a long-term relationship, trustful relationship, first of all, we have to change this mutual negative image. And I'm sure relations between the legislations, I mean the parliament and the Congress, Turkish parliament and US Congress, may have very fruitful and positive effects on changing of this negative image. But we need something more. Maybe we have to talk this about at the end of this program, but it is time to say we need more because in education level, for example, as a university professor, I teach Turkish foreign policy, I teach American foreign policy, but in many universities in Turkey and in the United States, we do not make anything that can positively affect the students' perception of the United States or students' perception of Turkey in two countries. So we should give much more importance to this public image issue, public perception issue, because if you have a just, if I may call, prejudice for the other country as a politician, as a bureaucrat, then your decision about this country will be negative as well. Secondly, the relations between leaders is also quite important. As you said, and I said, Tayyip Erdoğan was the leader of AK Party and is still the leading figure in Turkey, and he's the president. But he worked with two Democrats, and if you count Biden as well, 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So he worked with Mr. Trump, then Mr. Obama, then Mr. Trump, and again Mr. Biden. 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Each time, the relations between the leaders was defined and was the working teams of the presidents in 2 countries didn't always had good relations with each other. And this also directly affected Turkish-American relations. You may say, okay, the relations between countries cannot be affected the perceptions or the attitudes of the people. No, when it comes to Turkish-American relations, mainly they are affected with the attitudes, behaviors, perceptions of the leaders, particularly the President of the United States and President or the Prime Minister previously of Turkey. So we need more dialogue between the teams of the 2 leading figures. But now we understand better the FETÖ terrorist organization created some walls between Turkish and American legislative and executive. They wanted to use all tools to create or disrupt the link between Turkey and the United States by themselves. So we, even now, after 5 years after the coup in 2016, we still see some particular FETÖ figures in Washington, in the United States, who are still trying to negatively affect and damage Turkish-American relations. And using the previous credits, which they gained within the decades, because for at least 15 years during the AK Party, they had enormous power in Washington. They were the main powers who create the links between the United States and Turkey, and they're still using it. So we in Ankara saw that the negative burden of FETÖ still poisoning mutual relations. So we need a new page, a clear page to be opened between Turkey and the United States. And I think President Erdogan's meeting with President Biden in Brussels started such a page, a new blank page. And the main essence of this new new page is the clearance of all kinds of mutual distrust.
Thank you very much again, Kireççi Hocam. You did mention Russia, and one of the questions is on Russia. So I would like to pose that to you, so I can slip in as many questions as possible. So given, like, the question is, how close are Russian-Turkish relations given events in Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Libya, as well as in northern Syria? And as you mentioned earlier, there is a lot of misperceptions and mistrust that Professor Erhan mentioned between the West and Turkey, between the United States and Turkey. From that perspective, how do you see the Russian-Turkish relations?
Well, if I may add to what Professor Erhan said,
Absolutely.
a couple of things, very important things, which define Turkish-American relations. One thing is very important. Before I answer your question, I'm going to answer your question after that, that Turkish-American relations must be saved from only security paradigm. So this is one of the biggest problems that we face when we try to develop bilateral relations. So if we can expand the trade as much as we can, that I think is going to give us a broad range of opportunities. We practiced that during the last few years, especially, for instance, Turkey multiplied its purchase of LNG, not from one or two sources, but for instance, right now we purchase a lot of LNG from the United States of America. So that's one example, which indicates that there's more opportunity, more ways we can develop in terms of trade with the United States, one of which is the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's one thing. We have to save Turkish-American relations from becoming victim of only security framework, part of the security framework. The second one is that Turkish-American relations are bigger and larger and better than lobbies. This also should be stated. So what I feel during the last several years that Turkish-American bilateral relations are falling victims to certain interest groups in the DC. So when we look at the recent democratic takeover of the White House, we expected that, for instance, institutions would sort of take over and rationality, pragmatism would sort of reign in bilateral relations. But what I see is not necessarily, what should be expected, obviously. So these two important things should be highlighted. With regard to Turkish-Russian relations, which also have a Turkish-American dimension, I stated, for instance, in the beginning that when Turkey was left alone in the Syrian crisis, I say that was left alone, Turkey had to develop a security framework because we share more than 900 kilometers of borders with Syria where there was no central authority left. So especially after 2013, when Russia, with its army, sort of set its feet on Syrian soil, that changed the game. Okay, Americans were not they didn't want to be part of that game in Syria, only for their own benefits. But for the regional security paradigm, Turkey was left alone to tackle with this huge security problem. So therefore, Turkey had to develop a way to develop to sort of a cooperation with Iran and Russia in an effort to simply demote the enormity of the threat, which is directly affecting Turkish social and political life. Not to mention the economic. Turkey had to accept more than 3.7 million displaced Syrians, half of whom are women. So this big crisis, Turkey had to deal only by itself. On that account, I want to invite those who criticize Turkey, that Turkey is acting with Russia, to reason that there was no way out for Turkey. On another account, Turkey is developing a good defense procurement relations, agreements with Ukraine, with Poland, with other countries that are being considered as the eastern borders, eastern flank of European security mechanism, right? So Turkey is also sharing those security concerns. Yes, Turkey is acting on certain accounts with Russia, but Turkey does not recognize, for instance, the the cession of Crimea to Russia. So we have things that we agree with Russia, and then we have things that we don't agree on with Russia. But we can work with Russia as much as we can, okay? So yes, Turkey's involvement in those security affairs in Ukraine and Poland and other countries, Romania, raise eyebrows, to put it mildly, on the part of Russia. On the other hand, the saving of Karabakh from Armenian invasion is a whole different issue. For instance, put Turkey and Russia at odds with each other, as well as with United States of America. For the sake of lobbies, we received a lot of criticism from the United States. The fact that those lands belonged to Azerbaijan and were occupied is, simply ignored, and local politics, lobby politics, again, win the day. So from this perspective, we have a very pragmatic relationship with the Russian Federation. On the other hand, our economic dependency, so to speak, or for instance, not only gas, a lot of gas we receive from Russian Federation, but also Russian tourists prefer Turkish resorts. That is a very, very big and important economic activity that several Turkish businesses depend on. So, and plus, we are neighbors with Russia. So we have to live with Russia. When you consider this picture from a wider perspective, that Turkey is doing its best in order to survive and in order to maintain its priorities in the region.
Professor Erhan, I know both of you, although it's almost 7 in Turkey, both of you have further engagements. Your day is not over. So I want to quickly get your responses to quick questions from the audience. I obviously have a lot of questions, but I'm going to save them for another occasion. So would an improvement in Turkish-Israeli relations help US-Turkey relations, especially since it doesn't appear that the US will need Turkey to guard the Kabul airport? Maybe you can comment on the airport negotiations between US and Turkey as well, because that's being asked by another attendee as well. And then the other question is, do you see any positive relations in the future? We talked about a lot about the problem areas, but what is the positive potential agenda items? I'll go to Professor Erhan, and then I'll get back to you, Professor Kireçi, and I think we'll stop there. Please.
Okay, developing Turkish-Israel relations will definitely affect Turkish-American relations in a positive way. This is out of question. Not only because of the lobbies, but because of the U.S. perception of Israel is quite important. And when we go back to 2010, when this flotilla incident had happened, Turkey and Israel were at the bargaining table for purchasing of Israeli unmanned aerial vehicles, drones by Turkish army. Then, in 11 years, we are now at the deepest, maybe diplomatic relations with Israel, but I'm sure it will be improved, and they will have these relations will have positive effects on Turkish-American relations. When President Biden and President Erdoğan met in Brussels, they had an agreement on Turkish control and management of Kabul airport. But of course, everything is changing very fast in Afghanistan. After American troops had withdrawn from Afghanistan, now last night, Afghanistan president has left Kabul in order to prevent a bloodshed, if we caught him. And now Afghanistan Taliban forces are everywhere in Kabul. They're approaching to Kabul airport, and Kabul airport is now used to evacuate, if I may call it, some American troops, American families who helped the United States during the occupation, etc. And there are incredible views, video footages from Afghanistan. People are trying to get into any plane, then they just fell. Literally, they fell from the airplanes, American military airplanes, when they go up. So it is chaotic there. There's an ongoing meeting between the parties in Doha. We don't know what outcomes will come between the parties, if there is a party in the formal Afghanistan side anymore. So just 3 days ago, Turkish president announced on Turkish TV that he may meet with any leader from Taliban side, because we have to give credit to diplomacy, but it is very, very difficult to make any comment on the future of Kabul. But personally, if you ask me, I believe that we should give a chance to Afghan people. For almost more than 2 centuries, Afghanistan is under pressure of other powers. There had been at least 4 times in interventions from outside. British were there, Russians were there, Americans were there, and the world didn't give Afghans any chance to establish their own system. So without any external intervention, maybe this time they can reach in final analysis, this is their life. So we should give them chance for their future. And Turkish-American agreement is still there. There is no counter argument from any Turkish leader that Turkey will not be in Kabul. But of course, we should reanalyze the current situation in Afghanistan, and everything is changing very fast. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Kireçi. The last question was about potential positive item on U.S.-Turkey relations. Professor Erdoğan, if you want to simply name the issue without discussing it, that would be great.
It is not only security, but there are a wide range of areas we are cooperating, and we will certainly cooperate. The global warming issue, for example. The world is burning. From North America to Australia, everywhere is burning. We had record numbers of climate temperatures now. So we need a global cooperation against it. And Turkey and United States may play a very positive role within the scope of G20. These very big and important G20 countries have sensitivities about this issue. and the fighting against the COVID. I mean, the health problems and vaccination, this is quite important for Turkey. You know, this one of the vaccines, BioNTech one, was invented by two Turkish origin scientists living in Germany. So Turkey may also cooperate with the United States in this health issues. And thirdly, the immigrants is becoming one of the biggest human tragedies in world history. More than 100 million immigrants now, asylum seekers. They're escaping from many countries, and one of the destinations is United States, and Turkey is also one of the destinations. So, as two important countries as targets of immigrants and asylum seekers, Turkey and United States may cooperate on the issues to solve the basic problems which creates this environment for immigrants. But when it comes to security, of course, we have a lot of problems, and Turkey and United States are two important cornerstones of NATO alliance. If NATO is the strongest military alliance of modern world, this thanks to cooperation between Turkey and United States. Despite all problems, Turkish-American cooperation within the umbrella of United States persisted, and it will continue in the future years as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Erhan. Professor Kireççi, what is your area of positive agenda in the U.S.-Turkey relations?
Well, to begin with, that there's already a positive part of this bilateral relations, these bilateral relations are continuing, but what we need to do is to make that part of bilateral relations more visible and extend this positive possibilities, the potential. There's a lot of, I see, there's a big potential that we can tap. One of which is, for instance, in the field of textile, that United States of America is having certain issues with China, and I think those tension is going to increase with all its capability and readiness of Turkish textile industry can not replace but be one of the alternatives to American consumers. Another one is, for instance, in the field of education, Turkish-American relations, one of the most steady and stable aspects of Turkish-American relations. There's a continuous exchange, and mostly on the part of Turkish students and researchers, that they always try to go and engage with American universities, American research centers, and that's taking place. Those numbers are not sort of decreased, minus, for instance, the time of the coup attempt or some terrorist activities in Turkey. Another one is tourism. American tourists love Turkey, and when they come, it is being discovered that they always, at least 70% of those who came to Turkey, they always come back. So this is a good opportunity, and American tourists are not kind of other Antalya tourists only coming for sea and sun, but they also like, they do that, but they also like cultural visits, different parts of Turkey, Istanbul, Nevşehir, Amanos, and so on and so forth. So we need to expand on these aspects of bilateral relations. During the Trump administration, the motto that Turkish-American trade volume should be expanded to $100 billion annually. It's a big target, but you know what happened? We were actually expanding it. In the year 2000, if I remember correctly, it was about $10 billion, or a year before. And after that, it was $20 billion. So the proactive engagement in several aspects of bilateral trade obviously will increase. When you trade, you don't engage war. So I think we need to emphasize this aspect of bilateral relations, that Turkey and American markets a lot to share, to offer each other, and that should be tapped as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time to share your thoughts and analysis with us about the AK party's past 2 decades and how it redefined Turkish foreign policy. And we talked a lot about some of the long durée items that will probably survive other administrations in the future as well and define the Turkish relationship. And I really appreciate your being able to identify areas of potential cooperation that need further improvement. So that's more sort of promising areas right there. I appreciate again both of your comments, and I want to thank all our attendees for listening to us. And we will certainly continue this conversation and discuss Turkish foreign policy and US-Turkey relations as well. Thank you, Hocam, Kireççi Hocam. Thank you, Erhan Hocam.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.